I arrived at Sarah's school that day thinking it would just be another ordinary afternoon, the kind where I'd pick her up, she'd tell me all about her day in between bites of her after school snack, and we'd go home. Michael should be picking her up today, but I thought it'd be nice to surprise them both. But as I turned the corner, my stomach dropped. Flames were consuming the school, thick black smoke billowing into the sky. My heart slammed against my chest as I parked the car haphazardly and sprinted toward the chaos. Parents and teachers were shouting, children crying, firefighters pushing through the crowd. It was a nightmare come to life. "Sarah!" I screamed, my voice raw and desperate. "Sarah, where are you?" I kept scanning the sea of faces, searching for her bright smile, her tiny pigtails bouncing as she ran toward me. But she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere. I grabbed a teacher running by. "Where's Sarah? My daughter Sarah. She's in Mrs. Marshall's class." The teacher shook her head, panic written all over her face. "I don't know. We got most of the kids out, but some are still trapped inside." My knees almost buckled. Where was Michael? He was supposed to pick her up today. He should have been here. He should have gotten her out. "Where's my husband?" I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. I stumbled toward the main entrance, ignoring the firefighters yelling at me to stay back. "Sarah, Mommy's here!" The flames roared louder, as if mocking me. The heat was unbearable, pushing me further away every time I tried to step closer. I kept screaming her name until my throat burned, but it was useless. And then I saw him. Michael. He was standing on the edge of the crowd, holding a little girl wrapped in a blanket. For a split second, my heart lifted. He'd saved her. He'd gotten Sarah out. But as I ran toward him, the girl turned her head. It wasn't Sarah. It was Sophia, his ex-wife's daughter. I froze mid-step, my brain refusing to connect the dots. "Where's Sarah?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Michael looked at me, his face pale, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't name. Guilt, maybe, or shame. I couldn't get to her," he said, barely above a whisper. "What do you mean you couldn't get to her?" I shouted, my voice rising with every word. "You were supposed to be here. You were supposed to pick her up. Why are you holding Sophia? Where is Sarah, Michael?" He flinched but didn't answer immediately. "Sophia was closer," he finally said, his words cutting through me like glass. I didn't have time to get to both of them. I staggered backward, the weight of his words suffocating me. "You left her?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You left our daughter to save her?" The days that followed blurred together in a haze of grief and anger. Sarah's funeral was the hardest day of my life. Her tiny casket, surrounded by flowers, felt like a cruel joke. No parent should have to bury their child, especially not like this. Michael stood beside me during the service, silent and stoic. People came up to us, offering condolences, saying things like, "She's in a better place now," and "You'll find strength, somehow." But all I could think about was that Michael had made a choice that cost my daughter her life. At night, when the house was quiet and empty, I replayed his words over and over. Sophia was closer. There wasn't enough time, but something didn't sit right. Michael's protectiveness over Sophia seemed unnatural. He wouldn't let anyone question why he saved her, brushing off my attempts to talk about it. And then there was the money. Hospital bills for Sophia's therapy sessions that I didn't remember agreeing to. Where was all this money coming from? And why was he so determined to shield Sophia from everything? The truth came out like most ugly secrets do, in whispers and half-heard conversations. A former friend of Michael's dropped the first hint, a snide comment at the grocery store. It's no wonder he saved her considering. "Considering what?" I asked, my stomach twisting. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying my confusion. "You mean you don't know? Sophia isn't just his ex's kid, she's his kid too." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The air around me seemed to freeze. That couldn't be true. It couldn't. But it was. Michael confessed when I confronted him, though he tried to twist it into some kind of noble act. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you," he said, as if that made it better. "It was a mistake, but she's still my daughter, Evelyn. I couldn't just let her die." The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. This wasn't just about the fire. This was about years of lies, years of building a life with someone who had been hiding the truth. My grief for Sarah was now tangled with fury at Michael, at how he'd stolen every shred of trust I had left. I packed my bags that same night. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just gathered what little I could carry, tucked away the last photo I had of Sarah, and walked out the door. Michael begged me to stay, saying we could work through it, that he'd do anything to make it right. But there was no fixing this. He'd made his choice, and I was done paying the price for his mistakes. I left everything behind: our house, our life, my job. None of it mattered anymore. All I had was the memory of my daughter and the hollow ache of knowing I'd been betrayed by the person I trusted most. As I walked down the street, the cool night air biting at my skin, I whispered a silent promise to Sarah. "I'll keep going," I said. "For you. Somehow, I'll figure this out." I didn't know where I was headed, but I knew one thing for sure. I was never coming back. When I walked away from Michael and everything that tied me to my old life, I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I felt hollow, like I was floating through the world without any tether to hold me down. I ended up in a cheap motel in a town no one cared to visit, the kind of place where the wallpaper peeled at the corners and the smell of mildew clung to everything. I worked odd jobs, cleaning, waiting tables, anything that paid just enough to cover the room and a few meals. Every day was the same: wake up, survive, sleep, repeat. At night, I would sit on the sagging mattress and stare at the only thing that still mattered to me: a small framed picture of Sarah. She was laughing, her eyes bright and full of mischief. I used to keep it on my bedside table, and now it was the only decoration in the bleak little room. I'd talk to her sometimes, whispering apologies into the dark. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I wasn't there." My anger at Michael simmered beneath the surface, feeding a bitterness that kept me from reaching out to anyone, from letting anyone in. I didn't want company or comfort. I wanted Sarah. The first dream came on a night when the weight of it all felt unbearable. I'd fallen asleep clutching Sarah's photo, tears soaking the pillow beneath my head. In the dream, I was standing in a forest. The trees glowed faintly, their leaves shimmering like they were made of light. It wasn't a harsh light, though. It was soft, warm, almost comforting. And then I saw her, Sarah. She was standing just ahead of me, wearing the same pink dress she'd worn to her last birthday party. Her hair was tied back in a messy braid, and she was smiling at me like nothing had ever gone wrong. "Sarah?" My voice wavered, disbelief and hope crashing into each other. "Mommy," she said, tilting her head toward me. "Follow the light." I reached out to her, but before I could touch her, I woke up. My heart was pounding, and my cheeks were wet with tears. For the first time in months, I didn't feel entirely empty. There was something else there, a flicker of hope, faint but persistent. The dreams didn't stop after that. Every few nights, Sarah would come to me again, always in that glowing forest. Each time, she'd say a little more, her words a strange mix of childlike simplicity and wisdom far beyond her years. "Mommy, there's a path. You have to find it. There's something waiting for you, something you need to see." She'd lead me to places I didn't recognize: a mountain peak bathed in sunlight, a riverbank where the water sparkled like diamonds. The visions were beautiful, but puzzling. I didn't understand what she was trying to show me or why, but the more I dreamed, the more I felt different. Like a tiny ember had been lit inside me, fighting against the coldness I'd been carrying for so long. One night, the dream was different. Sarah stood in front of a roaring fire, her small figure silhouetted by the flames. She didn't look scared. If anything, she seemed calm, even serene. "There's a map, Mommy," she said, pointing toward the fire. "You need to find it." I stepped closer, squinting through the smoke. Within the flames, I could see an old, tattered map, parts of it curling and blackening as the fire consumed it. "Where is it, Sarah?" I asked, my voice desperate. She smiled at me, her face full of a quiet knowing. "It's already with you." I woke up with a gasp, the image of the map seared into my mind. At first, I thought it was just another strange, meaningless dream, but then I remembered the suitcase I'd packed in a rush when I left Michael. It was still sitting in the corner of my motel room, untouched for weeks. I dragged it onto the bed and unzipped it, my hands trembling. Beneath a pile of clothes and Sarah's favorite stuffed bunny, I found an old leather-bound book. It had belonged to Sarah, one of those create-your-own-adventure journals she used to love. As I flipped through the pages, something fell out and fluttered onto the bedspread. It was a map. The edges were worn, and parts of it were smudged and faded, but it was unmistakably the same map I'd seen in the dream. My breath caught in my throat as I studied it. The map pointed to a small, almost forgotten town nestled deep in the mountains. At first, I told myself it was ridiculous. A dream couldn't lead me anywhere. And even if it could, what was I hoping to find in some remote mountain town? But the map called to me. Every time I looked at it, I felt a strange pull, like an invisible thread was tugging me forward. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face, her voice echoing in my mind. Follow the light. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Maybe it was madness, or maybe it was hope. But either way, I packed my bags and checked out of the motel. I didn't have much, just a few clothes, some cash, and the map, but it was enough. As I started the long drive toward the town marked on the map, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of purpose. I didn't know what I would find, but for the first time since losing Sarah, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of running away. The drive to the town marked on the map was long and winding, with dense forests on either side of the road. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping low, casting everything in a hazy, golden light. The town itself was small, just a few rows of cottages, a general store, a modest inn, and a church steeple rising in the distance. Mist clung to the ground, swirling lazily as I parked my car near the inn. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Despite the quiet beauty of the place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong. The locals watched me with guarded curiosity as I stepped out of the car. Their expressions weren't hostile, but they weren't exactly welcoming either. An older woman sweeping her porch paused to give me a long, considering look, while a shopkeeper standing by his window seemed to mutter something under his breath. The buildings, though charming, had an odd quality to them. Strange symbols, intricate carvings of spirals, eyes, and crescent moons, adorned door frames and fences. At first, I thought they were just decorative, but the more I looked, the more deliberate they seemed. I checked into the inn, a cozy but weathered place run by a middle-aged couple. The woman at the desk handed me a key and muttered, "Don't stray too far into the woods at night." When I asked her why, she simply shrugged. That night, as I lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, the map sat on the nightstand beside me. My heart was heavy with doubt. Why had I come here? What was I even looking for? But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face, her voice echoing in my mind. Follow the light. The next morning, I couldn't resist the pull of the forest. The map didn't show much detail, but something about the trees felt familiar, as if I'd been here before. I wandered deeper and deeper, the air growing cooler and the light dimmer as the trees thickened. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a grove that took my breath away. The clearing was bathed in a soft, golden glow, though the sun was hidden behind clouds. The trees formed a perfect circle, their roots twisting together like they were holding hands. In the center stood a large stone, smooth and polished, with carvings that matched the symbols I'd seen in town. And then it happened. A figure emerged from the air itself, shimmering with an otherworldly light. It wasn't human. Its form shifted and flowed like liquid, its eyes glowing like embers. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt a strange sense of calm, like I was exactly where I was meant to be. "You've come," the figure said, its voice echoing in my mind rather than my ears. "Who? What are you?" I managed to whisper. "I am the Guardian," it replied, "a protector of your bloodline and the power it carries. You are here because the time has come to awaken that power." The Guardian began to weave a story, its voice painting vivid images in my mind. Centuries ago, my ancestors were entrusted with the task of safeguarding an ancient power, a force capable of both great creation and great destruction. The symbols I'd seen in the town, the carvings in the grove, they were all tied to this legacy. The fire that took your daughter, the Guardian said, its tone heavy with sorrow, was not entirely natural. It was drawn to you, a side effect of the power you carry. That power has been dormant within you, waiting to be awakened. My heart twisted. "Are you saying—" Sarah died because of me? No, the Guardian said firmly. Her loss was not your doing, but forces connected to your bloodline played a role in the tragedy. And now it is your choice whether to embrace what you are and use it to shape your destiny. I wanted to argue, to push back against the idea that some unseen force could have had a hand in my daughter's death. But deep down, something in me knew the Guardian was telling the truth. The Guardian stepped closer, its light softening as it raised a hand, or something like a hand, toward me. If you choose to accept this gift, it said, you will gain the ability to see and shape your path, to rise above the pain that has consumed you. But be warned, this power grows stronger with use, and it must be wielded with a pure heart. If not, it will consume you. I hesitated. Could I trust this? Could I trust myself? But then I thought of Sarah, of her voice in my dreams, her smile lighting up my darkest moments. If this power could help me honor her memory, if it could give me the strength to reclaim my life, how could I say no? I'll do it, I said, my voice steady. I'll accept the gift. The Guardian extended its hand, and the moment I touched it, a surge of energy shot through me. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. Like every cell in my body was waking up for the first time. My mind filled with images, the map, the grove, Sarah's laughter, and a light so bright it brought tears to my eyes. When it was over, I fell to my knees, gasping for air. But for the first time in months, I felt alive. As I stood in the grove, the Guardian's voice echoed one final time. This is only the beginning, it said. Your journey will be long and fraught with challenges, but you are stronger than you know, Evelyn. Follow the light and it will lead you to your destiny. The Guardian faded into the air, leaving me alone in the clearing. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same person who had walked into this forest. With the map in my hand and Sarah's voice in my heart, I began the walk back to town, ready to take the first step toward whatever lay ahead. The change wasn't instant. It started small, whispers of intuition that felt more like gut feelings than supernatural gifts. But as I leaned into the sensations, I realized they were more than just hunches. My dreams became clearer, sharper, showing me opportunities and paths I wouldn't have seen otherwise. One night, I dreamed of an old building with boarded-up windows, tucked away on the edge of town. The next morning, I decided to take a walk, letting my instincts guide me. Sure enough, there it was, just as I'd seen it. A dilapidated storefront, long forgotten. Something about it called to me. I had no experience in real estate, but I trusted the pull in my chest. After speaking with the owner, an elderly man who was eager to sell, I bought the property for a fraction of its value. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew it was important. As I cleaned out the building, my thoughts kept drifting to Sarah. Her laugh, her love for sweets, the way she'd beg me to bake cookies with her on rainy afternoons. It hit me then. The bakery wasn't just a business idea. It was a way to honor her, to keep her memory alive. I pulled out my grandmother's old recipe book, the same one I'd found during my darkest days, and began experimenting. Her handwritten notes felt like a message from the past, guiding me as I worked late into the night perfecting each recipe. The bakery opened with little fanfare, just a simple sign above the door, Sarah's Light. At first, I worried no one would come, but slowly, word spread. People raved about the desserts, each one made with the kind of care and love you could taste. Sarah's favorite treat, a caramel apple tart with a hint of cinnamon, became our signature item. Locals began calling it a little piece of heaven. Soon, tourists passing through the town heard about the bakery, and we became a destination. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. The bakery wasn't just a business, it was a place where people gathered, laughed, and shared stories. It gave me purpose. One evening, as I flipped through the map again, I noticed a faint marking I hadn't paid attention to before. It led to a cavern on the outskirts of town. The next day, I packed a flashlight and set out to explore, curiosity burning in my chest. The cavern was dark and cold, but my steps felt guided, like the map and the Guardian's gift were leading me towards something. Deep inside, I stumbled upon an old mining tunnel, the wood beams worn but sturdy enough to hold. And then, there they were, glinting in the faint beam of my flashlight. Diamonds scattered among the rocks like forgotten stars. I learned later that the cavern had once been part of a thriving mining operation tied to my family's history. The diamonds had been left behind, overlooked, or deemed too difficult to retrieve. Now they were mine. Selling the diamonds discreetly gave me the financial foundation I needed. I reinvested the money into the bakery, upgrading the equipment, hiring staff, and expanding our offerings. I even set aside funds for future projects, ideas that were beginning to take shape in my dreams. With the bakery flourishing, I turned my attention to the rest of the town. The place had charm, but it was struggling. Empty storefronts, faded signs, a sense of stagnation hanging in the air. I started small, buying another abandoned property and turning it into a cozy cafe where people could gather. Then a bookstore, stocked with local authors and rare finds. Each project brought new life to the town, drawing in visitors and rekindling pride among the locals. At first, people were skeptical of me. I was still the outsider, the stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere. But as they saw the changes I was making, their attitudes began to shift. "Evelyn, you're a miracle worker," the cafe owner said one afternoon, handing me a cup of tea on the house. "It's not just me," I replied, though I kept the full truth to myself. I knew the Guardian's gift played a role, but I also knew that I was the one making the choices, taking the risks. As the months turned into years, I became something of a fixture in the town. People started coming to me for advice, not just about business, but about life. They saw me as someone who had been through the fire and come out stronger. What they didn't know was how much I still carried with me. Sarah's loss was a wound that would never fully heal, but instead of letting it consume me, I used it to fuel my drive. Every decision I made, every success I achieved, felt like a step toward honoring her memory. I never mentioned Michael or the life I'd left behind. That part of my story felt like another lifetime, a shadow I didn't need to revisit. The bakery became more than just a business. It became a symbol of resilience, of turning pain into something beautiful. Every time someone walked through the door, their face lighting up at the smell of freshly baked bread or the sight of our famous caramel apple tarts, I felt a little closer to Sarah. She was the light that guided me, even now. With the diamonds giving me the capital I needed and the Guardian's gift sharpening my instincts, I began to think bigger. The town had given me a new life, and I wanted to give back in ways that would last. I started funding community projects, renovating the old library, organizing a farmer's market, and sponsoring scholarships for local students. Every project felt like another brick in the foundation of the life I was building. People began to see me as a leader, though I never sought the role. I wasn't trying to be anyone's savior. I just wanted to make something good out of the broken pieces of my past. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Back in the life I left behind, Michael's carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, piece by piece. After I left, Michael tried to present a facade of strength, but the cracks were already showing. His business, once a reliable pillar of success, started to falter. Clients began pulling out of deals, suppliers grew impatient with unpaid invoices, and his once loyal employees started looking for other opportunities. It wasn't long before whispers began to circulate. Rumors of his affair with Claire, Sophia's true parentage, and the financial corners he'd been cutting to cover up his mistakes began to spread. People who had once admired him for his charm and savvy began to see him for what he really was, a man who'd built his empire on lies. The scandals gained traction, hitting industry gossip columns and local papers. The more Michael tried to control the narrative, the worse things got. Investors pulled out en masse, and before he could recover, his once flourishing business was on the brink of bankruptcy. Claire Kama, who had once reveled in the power and influence that came with being Michael's partner, found herself struggling to maintain control. She had always been the type to demand perfection, but perfection was impossible to achieve when everything around her was falling apart. Her relationship with Michael, which had always been more about mutual convenience than genuine love, began to deteriorate rapidly. Michael, weighed down by guilt and the stress of his failing business, withdrew from her emotionally. Meanwhile, Claire's controlling tendencies only fueled the fire, turning every interaction into a battle of blame and resentment. She tried to cling to the wealth and status they had once enjoyed, but the cracks were impossible to hide. Friends stopped returning her calls, invitations to exclusive events dried up, and even her carefully curated social media presence couldn't mask the truth. The wealth and power that had defined their lives slipped further and further out of reach, leaving Claire bitter and angry. Caught in the middle of it all was Sophia. By now, she was a teenager, old enough to see through the lies and half-truths that her parents had tried to shield her from. She began to question everything. Why her father had prioritized her over me and Sarah that night, why her mother seemed more focused on appearances than on their family, and why their lives were unraveling before her eyes. Sophia struggled with feelings of guilt and confusion. Though she had no control over what had happened, she couldn't shake the sense that she had played a role in the chain of events that led to me leaving and Sarah's death. Her relationship with Michael and Claire grew increasingly strained. Michael, weighed down by his own guilt, avoided serious conversations with her, while Claire dismissed her questions and concerns as teenage dramatics. Sophia began to pull away from both of them, finding solace in her own small circle of friends and spending as little time at home as possible. As the months passed, things went from bad to worse for Michael and Claire. The financial pressure became unbearable, forcing them to sell their sprawling home and move into a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. Michael, who had always prided himself on his success and influence, found himself humbled and humiliated. The once confident businessman now struggled to get through meetings, his reputation following him like a shadow. He tried to start over, but no one wanted to work with a man whose name had become synonymous with scandal and failure. Claire fared no better. Without the wealth and power that had once defined her, she was forced to confront a reality she had always avoided. She didn't know how to function without it. Her attempts to rebuild her social standing were met with polite indifference at best and open scorn at worst. Their arguments became more frequent and more volatile, each blaming the other for their downfall. Sophia, caught in the middle, stopped trying to mediate and retreated further into herself. Finally, Michael hit rock bottom. With nowhere else to turn, he began to think about the one person he had always taken for granted: me. Michael didn't know where I'd gone after I left, but desperation has a way of sharpening focus. He began asking around, reaching out to anyone who might have a clue about where I was or what I was doing. His search eventually led him to a stray comment in an industry newsletter, a glowing article about a thriving bakery in a remote mountain town, helmed by a mysterious woman who had turned her life around after a personal tragedy. He knew it was me. Claire was skeptical when he brought it up. "Why would she help us now?" she asked, her voice sharp with disdain. "She's the reason we're in this mess." But Michael wouldn't be deterred. He convinced Claire that I was their last hope, that if anyone could help them rebuild their lives, it was me. "She's not heartless," he argued. "She won't just turn us away." Deep down, I think he believed that. Michael had always underestimated me, always assumed I'd be too soft, too forgiving to truly cut him out of my life. By the time they arrived in my town, Michael and Claire were barely recognizable. The confident, polished couple I had once known was gone, replaced by two people who looked worn down by the weight of their choices. They didn't know what they would find when they saw me again. But one thing was clear: they had come with a purpose, and they had no idea who they were about to meet. The first sign of them came through whispers. Locals at the cafe talked about a couple asking questions, clearly out of place in this quiet, secluded town. It wasn't long before they found their way to Sarah's Light, my bakery, completely unprepared for what or who they would find. I was behind the counter, arranging a tray of our signature caramel apple tarts when the door chimed. I didn't look up immediately, too focused on my work. But then, I heard a voice that sent a chill up my spine. "Evelyn?" When I turned, there they were, Michael and Claire. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. I hadn't seen them in years, and yet the sight of them stirred something raw inside me. But instead of the polished, confident people I remembered, they looked haggard, worn down by life. Michael's suit was wrinkled, his face lined with exhaustion. Claire's usual air of superiority was gone, replaced by a strained expression that teetered between anger and desperation. They hadn't expected to find me like this, thriving, radiant, and worlds away from the broken woman they left behind. Michael was the first to speak, stepping forward as if we were old friends. "Evelyn," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "It's been a long time." I folded my arms and leaned against the counter. "It has." His eyes scanned the bakery, taking in the cheerful atmosphere, the customers chatting at tables, the walls decorated with photos of happy moments and glowing newspaper articles. "This is incredible," he said, gesturing around. I had no idea. "You wouldn't have," I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You made sure of that when you let me walk away." Michael flinched, but he pushed on. "Look, I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you." "Hurt me?" I cut him off again, my voice rising. "You didn't just hurt me, Michael. You broke me. You lied to me. You left me with nothing while you played house with your mistress and her child." He looked away, guilt clouding his face. "I was wrong. I see that now." "Do you?" I said, crossing my arms. "What are you doing here, Michael?" "I came to ask for your help," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You've got to be kidding me." Michael's plea stirred a storm of emotions in me. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, the memories of betrayal threatening to overwhelm me, but there was also something else, a flicker of pity. He wasn't the same man who had stood in front of me all those years ago, smug and unapologetic. He looked broken. Still, pity wasn't enough to erase what he had done. "You left me to fend for myself," I said, my voice steady but laced with steel. "You took my daughter from me, Michael, and now you want my help? Why would I ever give you that?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with desperation. "Because I don't know where else to turn. Everything's falling apart. The business, our lives, Claire and I made mistakes, but we're trying to fix them. Please, Evelyn." His words hit a nerve, but I refused to let him see it. Instead, I shook my head. "You're not here because you care about me. You're here because you need something. Don't confuse the two." Claire, who had been silent up until now, finally stepped forward. Her face was pale, her voice trembling. "Evelyn, I know I don't deserve your kindness. I know I hurt you. But I'm begging you, for Sophia's sake. She doesn't deserve to pay for our mistakes." At the mention of Sophia, something in me shifted. I had always harbored a complicated mix of anger and guilt when it came to her. She was innocent in all of this, a child caught in the crossfire of adult failings. "She's struggling," Claire continued, tears brimming in her eyes. "She's questioning everything, who she is, what kind of people we are. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to help her." I stared at Claire, unsure of what to feel. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of the role she played in tearing my life apart. But another part of me, perhaps the part still connected to Sarah's memory, felt a pang of compassion. "Do you even hear yourselves?" I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're asking me to clean up the mess you made? You're asking me to save you after everything you've done to me?" Claire nodded, her tears spilling over. "Yes, because we have nowhere else to turn." For a moment, the bakery seemed to blur around me as memories rushed to the surface. I thought of Sarah, of the fire that had taken her, of the years I spent rebuilding myself from the ashes. I thought of the guardian spirit, of the gift it had given me, and the power I now carried. I could use that power to destroy them, to make them feel every ounce of pain they had inflicted on me, or I could walk away, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions alone. But then I thought of Sophia, the girl Michael had chosen over Sarah. She didn't ask to be part of this. She didn't ask to be born into a web of lies and betrayal, and as much as I wanted to hate her, I couldn't. I took a deep breath, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my tone colder than the words themselves. Michael's face lit up with hope, but I held up a hand to stop him. "But don't misunderstand me. This isn't forgiveness, and it sure as hell isn't me welcoming you back into my life. Whatever happens next, it'll be on my terms." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the middle of my bakery, surrounded by the life I had built without them. That night, as I sat in my quiet home above the bakery, staring at the photograph of Sarah on my mantel, the air shifted. The room grew colder, and the light from the candles flickered. I wasn't startled when the guardian spirit appeared. It had become a part of my life in ways I couldn't explain to anyone. The spirit's glowing form radiated a mixture of calm and gravity, its voice echoing directly in my mind. "Evelyn, the time has come for you to decide. Your power has grown, and your heart is heavy with anger and grief. If you do not choose your path, it will choose you. I frowned, my hands tightening around the warm mug of tea in my lap. What do you mean? I've already decided. I'm not going to let them manipulate me again. The spirit's form shifted slightly, as though unsettled. Your power is rooted in your emotions, Evelyn. The more you lean into vengeance, the stronger it will grow, but it will come at a cost. What cost? I asked, my voice trembling. The spirit's glowing eyes seemed to pierce through me. Your humanity, your peace, your connection to Sarah's light. If you use your power for destruction, it will consume you. After the spirit disappeared, I sat alone, the weight of its words pressing down on me. My first instinct was anger. Anger at Michael, at Claire, at the life they stole from me. But beneath that anger was something deeper, fear. What if the spirit was right? What if my desire for revenge had already begun to twist me into someone I didn't recognize? I closed my eyes and thought of Sarah. Her laughter, her curiosity, the way she used to tell me I was her hero. And then I thought of her words in the dreams that had guided me here. Follow the light. What light? Could it really mean forgiveness? Was I supposed to just let Michael and Claire off the hook after everything they'd done? I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I didn't want to forgive them. I wanted them to feel the same pain they'd inflicted on me. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that revenge wouldn't bring me the peace I craved. As I sat in silence, the world around me shifted. It wasn't the first time the spirit had pulled me into a vision, but this one felt different, more vivid, more urgent. I was standing in the middle of the town square, but it wasn't the bustling, cheerful place I had worked so hard to build. It was desolate, the buildings crumbling, the streets empty. The air was thick with a suffocating darkness, and I felt an ache in my chest that I couldn't explain. And then I saw them, Michael and Claire, broken and destitute, begging for help on their knees. Their faces were hollow, their eyes filled with despair. "This is what your power can do," the spirit's voice echoed around me. "If you choose vengeance, you will destroy them, just as you desire. But look closer." I turned and saw a reflection of myself in a cracked storefront window. My face was cold, unrecognizable. The warmth and light that Sarah had once brought into my life were gone, replaced by a hard, bitter expression. The spirit continued. "Revenge will give you satisfaction in the moment, but it will take from you everything that Sarah wanted you to have. You will become a shadow of yourself, consumed by anger and darkness." I stepped back, shaking my head. No, I wouldn't let that happen. The vision shifted again, this time showing a different path. I saw myself standing in my bakery, surrounded by light and warmth. Michael and Claire were there too, not as enemies but as broken people, seeking redemption. "This is the path of forgiveness," the spirit said. "It does not mean forgetting or excusing their actions. It means freeing yourself from the chains of the past and choosing to follow the light." The vision ended, and I was back in my living room, tears streaming down my face. The next morning, I stood in the bakery, staring out the window at the rising sun. My mind was still racing, replaying the spirit's words over and over. I had always thought of forgiveness as weakness, as letting people off the hook. But what if it wasn't about them at all? What if it was about me? I thought of Sarah again. What would she want for me, not just for her memory, but for the life I still had ahead of me? I took a deep breath and made my decision. When Michael and Claire returned to the bakery that afternoon, they looked more desperate than ever. Michael's shoulders sagged under the weight of his guilt, and Claire's once sharp eyes were dulled by humiliation. "We just want to talk," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fine," I said, motioning for them to sit at a corner table. As they settled in, I felt the power within me stirring, like a fire waiting to be unleashed. But I kept it in check. The spirit's warning was fresh in my mind, and I knew this was my test. "Why now?" I asked, folding my arms. "Why come to me after all these years?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Because we have no one else. I've lost everything, Evelyn. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm asking anyway," Claire added, her voice trembling. We don't expect you to forget what we did. We just we just want a chance to make things right. I looked at them, my emotions a swirling storm of anger, pity, and something else I couldn't quite name. This was my moment. I could destroy them with a single word, reduce them to nothing. But then I heard Sarah's voice in my mind, soft and clear. Follow the light, Mommy. Michael and Claire sat across from me, their eyes heavy with the weight of their mistakes. For a long moment, I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. I wanted them to feel the gravity of what they were asking me. Finally, I spoke. I've spent years carrying the pain of what you did to me, and for a long time, I wanted nothing more than to see you suffer the way I did. But I paused, my voice steady. I've learned that holding on to that anger only hurts me. I'm not going to let it define me anymore. Michael leaned forward, his voice trembling. Does that mean you forgive us? I took a deep breath. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what you did. It means I'm choosing not to let it control me. I won't let what happened keep me stuck in the past. So yes, I forgive you, but that doesn't mean I trust you. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. I held up a hand to stop her. Don't mistake this for an open door. I'm willing to offer you a small loan to help you get back on your feet. But there will be conditions. You won't misuse it, and you won't come back asking for more. If you break the terms, you'll have to deal with the consequences. Michael nodded, his expression one of deep relief. We understand. We'll do whatever it takes. This wasn't about them. It never had been. This was about me taking control of my life, on my terms. That night after they left, I stood in the kitchen of the bakery, staring at the photograph of Sarah that hung on the wall. It was a picture of her at the park, her face lit up with laughter as she held a caramel apple. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of anger or grief. They were tears of release. I placed a hand on the photo, feeling a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. Thank you, Sarah, I whispered, for guiding me here, for helping me see that I'm stronger than I ever knew. The anger I'd carried for so long began to melt away, replaced by a quiet determination to live a life that honored Sarah's memory. The guardian spirit appeared that night as I lay in bed, its glowing form filling the room with warmth. You've made your choice, it said, its voice softer than before. I have, I replied. And do you feel at peace? I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Yes, for the first time in a long time, I do. The spirit smiled, or at least I thought it did. Then, you have followed the light as Sarah wished. Your power will always be with you, Evelyn, but it is your heart that will guide how you use it. With those words, the spirit faded, leaving behind a sense of calm that settled over me like a warm blanket. The bakery continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of the town. People came not just for the desserts, but for the atmosphere, the sense of warmth and community that I had worked so hard to create. I started hosting baking classes for local kids, teaching them the recipes my grandmother had passed down to me. It was a way to keep her legacy alive while giving back to the community that had embraced me. One day, as I stood behind the counter, a little girl ran up to me with a wide smile. Miss Evelyn, can we make the caramel apple tarts today? I laughed and nodded. Of course. Let's get started. As I watched her laugh and roll out the dough, I felt Sarah's presence beside me, as if she were there in spirit, guiding me every step of the way. True to their word, Michael and Claire used the loan responsibly, rebuilding their lives piece by piece. They never returned to their old heights of wealth and power, but they found a quieter, humbler way of living. Sophia reached out to me once, asking if she could visit the bakery. I agreed, and when she arrived, I saw a glimmer of the girl she could become. Kind, thoughtful, and curious. We talked about life, about choices, and about finding strength in adversity. She left that day with a box of tarts and a promise to keep in touch. I didn't know what the future held for her, but I hoped she would find her own way to break free from the mistakes of her parents. Every decision I made, every success I achieved, I carried Sarah with me. She was my light, my guide, and my reason for continuing to push forward. One evening, as the sun set over the town, I stood outside the bakery, watching the world go by. The air was warm, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the fire, the betrayal, the grief, and the growth. It hadn't been easy, but it had shaped me into the person I was now. And as I stood there, I realized something. Sarah would always be a part of me, but so would the strength I had found in myself. This was my life, my story, and I was finally ready to live it fully.